Hello, everybody. This is Cindy Ingram, and welcome back to Wrecked by Art. So, last week I did not release an episode. I was tired, a little burnt out, and I listened to what my body needed, and that was rest. And it was very hard for me. I was like, oh no, I need to release an episode every Friday, but there was a very strong feeling that I needed to rest. So, this week's story is about that very thing, the wisdom of your body, the way that art meets you in that place of exhaustion, and that quiet, holy contrast between despair and joy. So, I'm going to tell you a little story. Back in September of 2021, so that is almost exactly 4 years ago, it was the very early stages of my burnout. It was actually like the very beginning of my big burnout that I told you about in the episode about the Jaws poster. I had just laid off some of my team members. I had had a really rocky year and plummeted into a state of anxiety and depression. I was very much struggling. So I had planned a weekend away to help me connect back with myself, help me rejuvenate, also help me connect with some art because there were two art exhibits that I really wanted to visit in Houston. And Houston is about 4 hours away, which, you know, from my first episode where I talked about Girl Before Mirror, that was another pilgrimage to Houston. The museums in Houston are amazing. So I was like, I'm going to connect with art, and then it'll help me feel better. And so I went to Houston for the weekend, this time, not just a 1-day trip like that one back in 2004, and went to the Ernesto Neto exhibit, which was one of the main reasons why I went to Houston. It was like this cool installation. We got to climb through, and it was like hanging from the ceiling. It was pretty badass. That was the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, but I also visited the Menil collection, which is a small museum that is absolutely beautiful. They have a big like medieval art collection. They also have a big surrealist collection. But what I was excited about was visiting Niki de Saint Phalle's exhibit. And she's one of my favorite artists. She was kind of ahead of her time. And there's an amazing documentary and video about her that I will post in a link in the show notes because you just need to see her work. And all the artwork that I talk about today, I will link in the show notes, of course, and don't look at it while driving. But I was in this depressed, anxious state. I did okay visiting the MFA Houston, but I was really feeling a distance from the art and me. And, you know, like if you have had mental health issues in your life, you know that they can separate you from the rest of the world, that you can feel like you're walking around, but you're not fully present, and that you're engaging with the world, but there's like a buffer, there's like a distance between you and everything else. And normally, when I go visit an art museum, I feel highly connected to the art. I feel really moved by it, or I'm delighted by it, or whatever it is. But I noticed that my state on this trip was like I couldn't find that connection and delight with the art. And I think a big part of it was that my businesses are related, and my burnout, I had been slowly distancing myself from art and writing and all the things. And so this trip, which I was hoping that I could really connect with the art, really I felt very disconnected from. So I go to the Niki de Saint Phalle exhibit, and she has, oh my gosh, her art, she creates these sculptures called nanas, and they are basically sculptures of fat women doing things. You know, they're dancing, or they're doing a cartwheel, or they're like flying through the air, or they're just sitting comfortably or laying down on the floor. They're just existing and in lots of different ways, and they are painted in very bold patterns and bright colors. You know, they're not like actual people with like real colored faces. It's all just kind of these abstract patterns and stuff all over them painted. And it's just so full of joy and bright and bold and so much motion and so much just pure joy. And I am looking at these artworks at the time, and I'm seeing this lightness, and I'm seeing this energy, and I'm seeing this beauty in these beautiful bodies. And I am feeling so far removed from that feeling of lightness, from that feeling of joy, from that feeling of delight. And these sculptures really felt like everything that I wasn't. Like I longed to feel that free and that unencumbered, but my body did not know what that felt like anymore. Like I was so burnt out. I wrote about these sculptures in my book, the chapter called The Three Graces, because I used that artwork of hers. I'm just going to read you the haiku. I have a haiku at the beginning of every one, and then I'm going to just read you one paragraph. I was going to read you this whole section, but I think that would be a little bit too much. But the haiku is, unburdened, they flow, light, unbound, giving no fucks. I long to feel free. And then this paragraph here is, it is revolutionary for a woman to be fully embodied, vital, and bold, to exist fully in her own skin for herself at whatever size she is. When I look at these sculptures, I don't see women existing to be seen, consumed, or judged. I see women existing to live loud and free, wholly their own and of this world. I see women who don't care what others think of them, who don't waste their time and energy getting caught up in worry or toxic thoughts. They didn't change themselves to fit someone else's definition of who they should be. And then it goes on, but then I have one last line here of this section that says, through the eyes of the nanas, I see what is possible for me in my own life, to feel at ease, to release my heavy burdens, to set myself free. And at this time, when I'm seeing this exhibit, I'd long to see this exhibit again now that I'm in a different space. In that line, I said, I see what's possible for me in my own life. And at that time, I don't know that I saw that as possible. Like that's how far gone I was. At that point, I didn't feel like it was going to be possible to get out of the place that I was in. And it's a really, it's a really sad place to be. And I loved the artwork, but I just felt so sad seeing that and knowing that I couldn't feel that way. So I'm looking at these sculptures, and then I leave the exhibit. I don't have pictures because they didn't let me take pictures, but I will post some pictures of her other sculptures so that you can see them. So then I keep going to the rest of the exhibit to look at the permanent collection. And that is where I found myself. There was a painting. It's called Mother of God. It is a Byzantine painting. It's on a wood panel, and it's of the Virgin Mary. And when I saw the painting, I didn't know it was the Virgin Mary. I mean, I would have gotten there eventually, but my first thought was her expression, her posture, the sort of agedness of it, the chipped away paint, the depth of emotion on the face of this painting done in like the 1200s. I saw myself in that painting. The sadness on her face mirrored the sadness that I felt inside. And I cried in front of that painting, not because of any sort of a religious connotation. I wanted to see myself mirrored in the Niki de Saint Phalle nanas, but where I saw myself was this sad painting of a woman who had just lost her child, basically. Another thing that I felt when I looked at this painting was I had been working with someone, she does theta healing, Yola Bametti, and she's actually been on the podcast before. I will link to her episode in the show notes because it's really good. We talked about a work of art together on the podcast. And she told me, and I don't know that I believe it. I mean, it's just one of those things like the whole like past life thing. Like, I'm pretty sure I do believe in past lives and I do believe in reincarnation. That feels like it makes sense to me, but that's one of those things like, well, you never know for sure. But she had told me that I had been a nun in a former life and that I didn't become a nun because I wanted to be a nun. I became a nun kind of out of surrender, out of giving up, because of the life that I wanted to lead wasn't possible during that time. And actually, I think she told me the nun thing twice and like didn't remember that she had said it the first time. But then also she had told me that my reactions to artwork, that they are me remembering past lives, which I think is fun to think about. Again, I don't know if I believe it or not. I like to imagine that I do believe it. And it doesn't hurt anybody to imagine that. So I had those thoughts in my head too as I looked at this, because I was like, oh, maybe I have been a nun in another life, and this just really just looked like a picture of a nun. So yeah, just another little thing that was going through my head there. After that, I was pretty emotional. Then I visited the Rothko Chapel, which I never gotten to visit before. It was always closed every time I went to Houston. Somehow it was managed to be closed, but it's in the same area as the Manil, and it is a chapel where Mark Rothko painted the Stations of the Cross, which is the scenes of Jesus's crucifixion and resurrection. And I was raised Catholic. I'm not Catholic anymore, but we used to do the Stations of the Cross like at Easter season. Every time we'd go through each one, and there was paintings in the church, and we would look at the paintings and talk about what happened at each step or whatever. So Stations of the Cross was very familiar to me, but Rothko did the Stations of the Cross, and all the paintings are black. They're not the traditional, like, here's Jesus carrying the cross, here's Jesus being nailed to the cross, and here's, all of that. It wasn't that. It was just black, and like in a purpley black, and like each one is different. And then it's in this room that is like, I don't know if it's octagon or decagon or whatever, but it's a polygon where each facet of the polygon is one of the paintings, and they're huge. And I spent some time in there, and that felt really, it tied into the mood of how I felt to look at these big black paintings. And I just kind of sat there for quite a long time in the Rothko Chapel. And I was really reflective, and I did some writing too, which I don't know where I did it because it's lost. But I remember thinking about this contrast between that radiant joy from the Niki de Saint Phalle sculptures and then that deep sorrow that is reflected in the Mother of God painting, and how humanity, like being a human is a trip that we can experience such depths of sorrow and such depths of joy. And at the time I couldn't touch that joy, but I could feel the truth of that grief. And so it was really, I don't know, I think about that experience a lot, and I'm kind of having a hard time putting it into words. But I was staying in Houston, and I was going for 2 nights at a hotel. So I'd already stayed one night at the hotel. And I always bring my tarot cards because I love like being alone in a hotel and playing with my tarot cards. And I was looking at my pictures from the trip before I recorded this. And there are pictures of the cards that I drew. And this will tell you, if you're into tarot, this will tell you the state that I was in. Is I got the 8 of Swords, which is in the picture on the card, is a girl looking in a mirror, and in the mirror she's completely like tied up and blindfolded and handcuffed, and these like birds are swarming around her, tying her up, and she just looks like in a state of despair. And then the other one I got was the 4 of Swords, which is, the girl is like huddled up in a nest. It's kind of like a nest of thorns. So it was this place of rest and giving myself the space I needed to heal. And I found the whole trip to be very overwhelming. Like in the state that I was, I didn't yet know about my autism and about my capacity and energy and that sort of thing. So the whole trip I found to be very hard. The driving, the finding the hotel room, the feeding myself, like everything felt extra hard. And so I decided while I was in the Rothko Chapel looking at the art that I needed to go home, that I thought that the art could fix me. I thought that the beauty of the experience would revive me in some way. But what I needed wasn't more awe. I just needed more sleep and more stillness and more safety and more home around the people that I loved. And it was a moment of really listening to what my body needed. And it was a moment of listening to my own limits, trusting what I knew to be true in the moment. And so I left, I didn't stay the second night, went back to the hotel, packed up my stuff, drove home. And, I still think about those sculptures all the time. And I still think about that painting. And I hold them kind of like bookends of the possibility and the pain. And this is the story of being human. And I was having a discussion the other day with my partner about kind of two ways to go about life, right? You can go through your life and you can not deal with your pain and your trauma, and you can kind of push it down and you can play it safe. And you don't maybe experience the hard pain of healing, but you also don't get to experience the joy of healing. And healing can be discussed online as like this sacred thing, and you feel so good, and living your bliss and whatever it is that they say. But like that healing is actually very deeply painful. And all the work that I've done on myself, all the therapy, I've worked with coaches and therapists and hypnotherapists and all sorts of things. And then writing my book and creation is healing, but it brings up so much pain and it brings up so many things to deal with. But if you choose that path of healing, it's not as steady as the other path, but the lows are lower and the highs are higher. And to feel those high highs, the beautiful light freedom of Niki de Saint Phalle's nanas, you have to go through the really painful parts too. And choosing that path is choosing the possibility of the nanas. It's choosing the possibility of wholeness and of joy, but it is also choosing pain too. And I said I drew the Nine of Swords, or the Eight of Swords and the Four of Swords, but I also drew the Queen of Wands, which is a joyful, magical card. The woman has like a light fire in her hand, and she is joyful, and she's surrounded by candles, and she's like in this triumphant pose. So basically, those cards in the art showed me that it's possible to feel joy. But right now I had to take care of the feelings that I did have, which was the depression and the anxiety and the just exhaustion from the years before leading up to that burnout. And, I am on the other side of that burnout, and I am feeling the joy and lightness of those nanas in my life right now. And it's worth all that, all the pain that it took to get here. So if you are somewhere in that heaviness, I just want you to know that I see you. You're doing really hard work, but it is worth it. If you're dancing like a nana, keep dancing. And if you're somewhere in between, I hope that you can find art that holds you gently through your journey. All right, so that is all for today, my episode. Thank you for your patience on not having an episode last week. I had to listen to my body, and that's what it told me to do. Next week, we have a guest on the podcast who's going to share their experience of being wrecked by art. If you have a story of being wrecked by art, it could be a book, it could be a movie, it could be a song, it could be artwork, it could be a dance, it could be anything art related, send me an email, cindy@artandself.com. Maybe we can have you on the podcast. And then next week on the 28th, I'm hosting an ugly zine night. We're going to make some bad art and do that together. The link is in the show notes, cindyingram.com/zine, Z-I-N-E. You can follow me, TikTok, and on Threads. Those are my two social medias of choice. Also on Instagram with my mosaics. And thank you so much for listening today. And thank you for pondering this depth of humanity with me today. I will see you again for the next episode of Wrecked by Art. Bye.